Okay, picture this. You just got to work at the plant in Kentucky, but something feels off. You see someone new, maybe? Or you realize someone who has a pickup backed up to the factory and they are stealing. So you approach them and they panic. They jump into their pickup and squeal their tires, damaging a scale. Then they turn and start driving at your coworker. Hi, hello, and welcome to another episode of True Crime Culinary, the show where we look at the food history hidden away in true crimes. I'm your host, Leah. I started this podcast because I love asking, why though? And disappearing into random corners of history. And it's so fun to find more people who also love digging into corners of the universe. Speaking of, I got a comment from a listener on the YouTube channel. P.S. Go check it out. You get to see pictures. It's fun. And they had a comment related to the spam episode. It's a fun episode, so I highly recommend listening to it. In the spam episode, we talked about the role of Monty Python, who did a skit on spam, and over time, that is how the word became relevant to emails. And then, you got to forward it to 8 people and curses on your cow and your horse or whatever. So Monty Python used it, meaning spam, because Britain had to keep buying spam from the US because of the Lend-Lease Bill, I believe, in World War II. And they had too much spam in their country. So the skit itself was kind of referencing a time that everybody would relate to. Thanks for the added context. Love the comments. Thank you so much. Now, in other TV news, I was rewatching the Barbecue Showdown on Netflix. It's a pitmaster competition where people obsess over the wood, the smoke, the rubs, and the sauce. And it got me thinking, where does charcoal come from? Because it's like everywhere, and yet I have no idea how it turns into those little ravioli-shaped briquettes. So, just days before one of the biggest barbecue weekends of the United States in the year, I thought I'd arm you with a few random facts to casually drop, and whether you use those facts to bring people closer to you or push them away and start arguments, that is up to you. So grab your flames and let's get smoking. This is going to be a wild ride. Now, I grew up in California, so for me, the words grilling and barbecue are basically interchangeable words. It's fire plus meat equals food. But my husband, who's from Kentucky, and thus I can never say Kentucky normally ever again, has very strong feelings about the difference. So a quick explanation. Grilling is hot and fast. Think like steak, burgers, hot dogs, chicken breasts, vegetables. Foods that only need a few minutes over direct heat because they're already tender and uncomplicated. Versus barbecue, on the other hand, it is all about low and slow. Instead of cooking in minutes, we are talking many, many hours. Barbecue rewards patience. So if you're a meatosaurus, you might know that a tenderloin is naturally tender because it's along the spine. Also, there's a hint in the name. A brisket, I had to look this up, or a cow chest, helps support much of the cow's weight every single day. Same with ribs. They are in action all the time as we're breathing. Those muscles, therefore, are packed with connective tissue called collagen, making them tough if they're cooked quickly. Barbecue, on the other hand, transforms meat that would otherwise be chewy into something tender by breaking down that collagen. And I'll explain why, because science. Also, for you non-barbecue people like me, barbecue is just this one big cloud of smoke and long wait times. But for people who have lived around it, you can taste the sauce or the rub and know exactly where that pitmaster is from. Barbecue in itself, as a cooking method, arrived in North America in the 1500s. But recognize that American barbecue developed over centuries because indigenous cooking methods met European livestock, while enslaved Africans helped shape many of the pit cooking traditions still used today. And then later, immigrant communities added their own twists. My people, the German settlers, influenced Carolina mustard sauces. German and Czech immigrants shaped Texas brisket and simple rubs. Kansas City became known for sweet sauces and burnt ends thanks to African-American migrants. And Memphis became famous for pork and dry rubs, influenced in part by Greek restaurateurs. And I think that is so cool. It's like a mosaic forming over time and a map of history in food. Okay, so cut to the 19th century, barbecue had become far more than a cooking technique. It's like a whole vibe. Entire communities would spend the day tending fires, sharing meals, swapping stories, doing political stuff, and arguing over whose barbecue was best. A tradition, if you've ever attended a family cookout, that probably sounds pretty familiar. But there was one major problem: fire. More specifically, the wood that supports that fire. Pitmasters are all about wood. Flavors. That's what she said. I know, I can't help it. Why are they obsessed with wood? Okay, it's time for a little bit of barbecue chemistry. My fave. So, fresh wood is full of water and compounds that ignite quickly. As fire burns through the wood, it releases smoke packed with hundreds of tiny flavor molecules. That's super wonderful for barbecue as like a flavor thing and like a cooking thing, but it also means that fire can be unpredictable. Temperatures rise and fall, and the logs constantly need attention. Now, wood itself is made mostly of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. As those components heat up, they break apart into hundreds of aromatic compounds. Some create the familiar smoky aroma, others add hints of vanilla, spice, sweetness, or even clove-like flavors. You see this in whiskey, wine, I don't know, benches, walls, houses, who knows? Anyway, anywhere that you've smelled and been like, oh, that smells like, that's the wood. Or I should say it's the cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Anyway, different woods produce different flavor compounds, which is why pitmasters argue endlessly about whether hickory, oak, apple, pecan, or mesquite is best. Remember the tougher meat that we talked about in cow chests, though? They have a lot of collagen and tendons. So hours of low heat slowly convert that tough connective tissue into silky gelatin. So fat gradually renders, helping keep the meat moist while the outside begins drying just enough for something else to happen. A dark crust forms, and pitmasters call that bark. It's a combination of dehydrated spices, rendered fat, smoke particles, and browning reactions that create one of the most flavorful parts of the barbecue. And then there's the smoke ring. Usually you can see that when you slice the meat and you can see the bark, and then you'll see like a ring that's a different color than the rest of the meat. People often think that pink layer just beneath the surface proves how smoky a piece of meat is, but surprisingly, it doesn't. Because one fun myth, the smoke ring isn't actually caused by smoke flavor. It's caused by gases from the fire reacting with proteins in the meat. So a beautiful smoke ring doesn't necessarily mean smokier barbecue. It mostly just means like there was a lot happening. Okay, so barbecue is sciencey cooking. Love that for us. And it takes a ton of time with a big payout. But there's also a lot of risk, because you could mess up the wood and burn the meat. Because before you even get the meat over the heat, you've spent a while getting the fire down to coals and evenly spreading and controlling those coals so they're the hottest and least smoky. So that means only a few people really have the time and space to do something like that. Thus, wouldn't it be cool if someone could help with a more approachable solution? And that's why Ford enters the chat. In the early 1900s, Henry Ford's factories used enormous amounts of wood to build Model Ts. Every day, they were left with piles of scraps, sawdust, wood chips, and small pieces that couldn't be used to build cars. And most companies would have thrown them away. Ford wondered, though, if they could become something useful instead. I love that. So working with a relative by marriage, Edward G. Kingsford, there's a lot of Fords in there. So working with a relative by marriage who was named Edward G. Kingsford, a la Kingsford charcoal, our friend Ford helped build a plant that compressed these leftover wood scraps into charcoal briquettes. I was like, wait, but okay, how does this actually work? Fire needs oxygen, famously. So if you heat wood with almost no oxygen, think of it like you have a space, you have a big metal drum, you put wood in there, you put really hot air in there. But you basically aren't allowing the wood to catch fire because, again, there's not enough oxygen. Instead of lighting on fire, it loses water and gases until what remains is carbon. And that's charcoal. That means afterwards, when you add, like fire and oxygen back in, it burns. But in the process of making it, we're basically taking out the moisture. So in a coal-making plant, after this process of basically burning without flames, larger pieces become lump charcoal. Talking like actual, tan bark size pieces. Those are going to become lump charcoal. While the smaller bits are mixed with starch binder, pressed into ravioli briquettes, and baked again until they harden. They're actually a little bit softer when they come out of that first press, so they're baked again. And voila, we have charcoal ravioli. So now, instead of burning through logs every weekend, families could buy bags of fuel that burned more consistently, lasted longer, and were much easier to transport. So many pitmasters nowadays use charcoal as the steady heat source, then add chunks of hardwood like hickory, oak, apple, pecan, or mesquite to add flavor. But at the time, we still had one more problem, which was that for centuries, all of this chemistry happened over like brick pits, open trenches, or homemade smokers, or like raised platforms. Like it took a lot of effort. So then in 1952, someone looked at a floating buoy and had an idea. Now how that one came about, I want to know. Were they just like, were they skipping? Were they walking? Were they in a boat? Were they looking at dolphins? Our home slice, George Stephen, worked for Weber Brothers Metal Works, a company that made marine buoys. Sidebar, I didn't realize marine buoys were, well, I guess that makes sense. They would have been made out of metal. I don't know how much plastic was there. Okay, sidebar closed. Like many people at the time, he was frustrated with the open charcoal grills available in the early 1950s. If wind blew, the ash would go onto the food. I think there was no lid, thus rain would put out the fire, and temperature control was almost impossible. So he was like, I have idea. So he cut a steel buoy in half. He added legs. He added a lid. I do wonder if, as he stared at it, maybe he drew eyeballs on it. He then adjusted vents. He bored some holes in there, put a little flap over the holes so that you can open the vent, and as more oxygen reaches the fire, it burns harder. Close them and the fire slows down. So for the first time, ordinary backyard cooks had real control over temperature, and they had a place to actually do the barbecuing. They didn't have to invest a bunch of time into like a wood stack, an axe, an enormous pit, and thus the Weber kettle grill was born. As suburbs expanded after World War II, so did the American backyard. Thus we have competitive barbecuing, which exploded as a sport. Teams spend months perfecting recipes, debating wood choices, trimming briskets with surgical precision, and chasing trophies that can be worth serious prize money, not to mention extraordinary bragging rights. Which is also how we arrive at Netflix investing in a barbecue show. Love that for all of us. It's very fun to watch, by the way. You learn a ton and get hungry. Now, speaking of being in a pit, how about the pit of panic that coworker must have felt as a truck of charcoal screeched towards them, because this entire thing took place at a Kingsford charcoal plant. That poor coworker almost got hit, but didn't. They survived. And later the police caught the thief. He went to jail, but according to the article I read, he is out again. He's got something like 13 felonies, so really don't think he's on a path to change. Think he's just going to keep on running that back. But speaking of history, I have so much more respect for barbecue because every brisket, every rack of ribs, every backyard cookout carries a little piece of history with it. Indigenous cooking methods, European livestock, African pitmasters, immigrant traditions, Henry Ford's wood scraps, and a floating buoy turned grill. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen.